If we are all set, glad to have everyone here. Welcome everyone to our DX Cafe event, Predicting the Future of Headless and Composable DXP. I am Matthew McQueenie from Composable. If you have any thoughts as we move along and before our actual chat at the end, please put them in the Zoom chat. It's always nice to see some back and forth. I'm sure Deane will love seeing that as well. As I said, joining me today is Deane Barker, Global Director of Content Management at Optimizely. I personally am really drawn to Deane because he's a businessman, but also kind of a philosopher in this marketplace and beyond. Once we started speaking with Deane in the lead up to these, several of us at Conabos were inspired to actually create our own content based off of those discussions. Love the analogy stuff. So I think we'll all catch that today. I saw a tweet from Deane's where he wishes he could just have a job with metaphors, I think, right? So
good metaphors, yeah.
Absolutely. So Deane, thanks for being here. Welcome. If you wouldn't mind, could you introduce yourself and give the audience some background and also how long you've been working in the content management space?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Matthew, you're referring to me as a businessman and a philosopher, which I find hilarious because I am neither a businessman nor a philosopher. But my name is Deane Barker, and I'm the Global Director of Content Management at Optimizely. Optimizely is a digital experience company. We used to be Episerver, and we acquired Optimizely a couple of years ago. We took their name. So I manage the content management product here. I'm in charge of that from a strategic direction. I have been working in CMS for, I don't know, it's vague, 25 years maybe, since the late 90s. I live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Been married for 23 years. I have 3 children. I love to read, and I love content management, like content management books. Like that's pretty much like where I am. So I'm happy to be here. So thanks everybody for coming.
Great. Yeah, we can see all the books in the background. I know we've spoken about that in the past. How many books do you read? I don't know. Do you do it by month, week? Do you just start books and then go to the next?
No, I read between 8 and 12 a month. So I calculate my stats. Okay, let me just pause real quick, and I'm going to ask everybody to do something. And this is not just a plea for attention, I swear. But I realized when I was thinking about this talk, there's like a million links I want to send people. Like, I'm going to send you a link to this. So here's the thing. Follow me on Twitter, and I will start a thread of all the links I mentioned during this talk. And so on Twitter, I'm Deane_Barker. There's an E on the end of Deane. If you follow me on Twitter, one of the links I'll send you is I track all of my reading in Goodreads, and I review every book I read. And I have a page on my website, deanebarker.net/reading, which lists every book I've read on Goodreads in the last 8 years, has reviews for them all. And then also I calculate my pace. This year, I'm running at about a 350-page book every 4 days, probably.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really impressive. I'd like to find the time, but I guess did you take classes for power reading? I know it's not about this, but I'm just intrigued.
No, the biggest thing is just, my youngest child turned 18 last week. So having adult children gives you a lot of time to read. So I read at least an hour a day, sometimes 2. I'll read 6-7 hours on a weekend.
Wow,
that's great.
That's impressive for sure.
Your favorite genre? I don't mean to monopolize this on reading or focus on reading, but what's your favorite genre?
Love history. Right now I'm reading The Covenant by James Michener, in fact. I love history and I love science. I read fewer business books than you would think and fewer tech books than you would think. Most of my tech consumption is digital, but history and science, I read quite a bit of faith. I do quite a bit of Bible reading every day as well. So yeah, history, the Covenant is 900 pages long, so this is going to take me a couple of weeks. But...
Wow.
So Deane, do you find, this will tie into what we're actually speaking about, do you find that reading kind of this vast library of books helps you with your metaphor and analogy thoughts?
I hope so. I hope so. I don't know, because we're talking about counterfactual, like how would I be without that reading? I don't know. I did last year here's another link I'll put in Twitter, but I did start last year keeping track of all the stuff I looked up. In September, like when I read these books, I just look up a ton of stuff. Like I see a word that I don't understand or a concept I don't understand, I look it up. And so I started like codifying that research and publishing that. So I'll send a link to a page on my website called Stuff I Had to Look Up. And right now, I think as of this morning, it's 402 things that I had to look up like the definitions to. And I keep looking at this and thinking, I hope I'm smarter because of this, but like, who knows? I maintain, I tweeted about this the other day, that like right now, objectively, I'm the smartest I have ever been in my life, but information has expanded so fast that I'm also the dumbest I've ever been in my life. Like I know more than I've ever known, but I know less of what's possible to know than I've ever known. So I'm getting both smarter and dumber at the same time, which is weird.
There's something for you.
That's great. Well, that's the philosopher thing. You're always thinking of that. But why don't let's talk a little bit about how the current state of the CMS, headless, composable market is much like the past. Last week in our inaugural event, we used the Back to the Future reference. But here I have chosen to go with William Shakespeare. I hope you're honored. But it is said that the current headless composable market is a lot like it was 20, 25 years ago. You brought up 25 years ago on cue. What do you see kind of in that thread of thought?
Well, what's interesting is that when you look at content management, one of the big architectural decisions on content management is the separation of management and delivery. Like you manage content in one place and you deliver content in another place. And I actually thought up another metaphor the other day. Produce on the shelves at a supermarket. Everything that happens prior to that produce getting on a shelf is management. Everything that happens to get that produce off the shelf is delivery. And that's everything we do to get content into a published state and a consumable state is really management. And everything we do to get that content actually consumed is delivery. And those two relationships between those two sides of the coin, I think, have really defined content management for a long time. And I think we have some slides later about the different coupling models, right? We were decoupled and then we were coupled, and now we're sort of weirdly decoupled again. So I think it's funny how we're kind of going full circle in terms of the way we architect CMS. And I think a lot of that has been driven by the power that we can do in the browser now, because a lot of things that we used to do on the server that we now do in the browser. So our server side delivery can be much more static and less active. So it's weird. I try not to be old. I'm 50 years old. I turned 50 last year, and I try not to like show my age. When I was in my 20s and I got my start in IT, I was convinced I could solve every problem. And I was the smartest guy in the room, and nothing good had happened before I got there. And then I showed up and everything was awesome. And these older guys in IT that had been doing IT since like the 80s, I was a popular target for ridicule because I was convinced I could solve every problem. And now I've become one of those guys, right? I've become one of those people that looks at these 20-year-old kids who are just like resolving all the problems that we solved in the past. And I feel old. I try not to feel my age. I'm 50 now, and that's an eternity in the technical field.
Well, that's okay. So we hear the term headless all the time now. Hopefully everyone does. How do you define headless, and what are the key characteristics that differentiate it from the alternatives? I think you talked a bit about on the CMS end, right, of the management and delivery. Is it kind of the similar vein there?
Yeah, well, a headless CMS fundamentally just manages content and doesn't deliver it, right? I think the analogy, I don't know who came up with the term headless, but the analogy is that delivery is the head, and we chop that off. So we just don't do delivery. If we talk about management and delivery, like a headless CMS is literally the one that can lay claim to the term CMS, because my product I call a CMS, but it does more than that. It both manages content and delivers it. But a headless CMS, like a Contentful or a Prismic or an Agility or whatever, literally just manages the content. You have to bring your own delivery. So that's how really I'm defining headless, but the term can get vague. When we talk to people that come in to Optimizely, I'm on a lot of sales calls, and people we want to do headless. Well, what do you want to do with headless? There's two major lenses that we're looking at headless right now. The first lens is what we're calling client-side templating. So when someone says they want to do headless, they may think, well, we just want a template in React or Svelte or Ember or whatever. Well, that's one type of headless. The other type of customer comes in and says, I want to do headless because I want to separate content from presentation, and I want to deliver my content on wholly different channels. Well, that's an entirely different value prop, and we would probably approach that entirely different way. So headless is something that just does management. If you want to have a CMS and just template it in React, I'm not really calling that headless. That's just templating by a different name, really.
When on that point, when you speak about all the different touch points that a headless CMS can deliver to, what are the handful that you really think are critical? I mean, off the top of my head, I'm thinking web, mobile, but do you get into to social? Do you get into the billboards? I mean, it seems like those use cases are less and less. What do you think about that?
Okay, this is where I have a tendency to get myself in trouble and be unpopular, but I'm going to state this for the record, especially in North America and Europe. Most organizations' primary delivery channel is the web. I'm going to say that as a blanket rule. There are exceptions. I understand. You may be thinking, no, what about so-and-so? And I get it, there are exceptions, but largely most delivery channels are the web. I did make that statement once at a keynote presentation I did, and someone came up to me afterwards and said that is not true in Asia. If you're in China or Japan or Singapore or something, it's much more focused on mobile devices, like mobile apps, and I get that. For North America and Europe, the primary delivery channel is the web. So I feel like most organizations would be more well served by a very, very competent web content management system with headless capabilities that they can use to push into other content. Because when you talk about content that you're delivering, you're primarily generating web-based artifacts. Other artifacts, you might power a mobile app with it, but honestly, a lot of mobile apps today are just web view apps. I mean, a lot of mobile apps are really just like progressive web apps. One of the great dreams is that we would content manage our main content and then push versions of it like into social media channels. That very rarely happens. Too often you see organizations just pushing content with like Buffer or Hootsuite into social media, and they don't actually connect the two. Could they connect the two? Maybe. Would it be worth their while? I don't know. Only if they're pushing a whole lot of volume. So I am a huge believer in the fact that the web is the primary delivery channel, and we can have some headless capabilities to connect your web CMS to other things, but those other things are going to be other things.
Do you find in the industry when you're on calls, especially in the enterprise, that it's difficult still for the web producers, the content producers in a site to give up styling and to just trust that content can go in there and then there will be a layer who will take care of the presentation?
Yeah, one of the big problems with pure headless, and this has been solved in some cases, so I don't want to say it's a problem without a solution, but editors want preview, right? They want preview and they want page composition. They want to drag things around on the page, things like that. And they're not getting that from a pure headless solution. When you divorce the management from delivery, well, the problem is people want to see what it's going to look like in delivery. They want to see what it's going to look like in delivery. Now, if you are a headless CMS, there are attempts on that side to bridge that gap. So I know like Contentful has your ability to put preview URLs in the admin UI. So you can click there and go to a preview URL. I know that, Kentico Content has some client-side library that you can click to edit on the client side. But people want to see how things are going to look in the delivery. And so what we've done in Optimize the Content Cloud, we actually have multiple delivery channels that you can preview in. So you can look at your content as on the web, and you can have a different set of templates that would show what it would look like on a phone and what it would look like as a social media update. And so not only do people want to see what it's going to look like, they want to see what it's going to look like in every possible delivery environment. That can be tricky to do when you disavow or reject any concept of delivery. So it can be problematic.
So you have a really nice deck. I'm sure you would share it after, but I pulled out a couple of the core principle elements. I will give you credit. This is all Deane. You've spoken to a few of these things, but I thought these were really good to pull out and actually look at versus yesterday, today, the headless future. Could you just talk through these two a little bit?
Sure. This deck actually came from a sales kickoff we did at Optimizely about 2 years ago. And about 2 years ago, we really started to see a notch up in people looking for headless. So I put together kind of a headless 101 course for our sellers. And the core principle I maintain is understanding that the management and delivery of content are not the same thing. We have been spoiled, and this will be on the next slide, but we've been spoiled with the concept of coupled CMSs where management and delivery are the same thing, right? They're served out of the same system. I'm sorry, go back to slide 9.
Sure.
These are what are called coupling models. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through kind of the 3 major coupling models that we've seen. They kind of progress throughout history. And let me talk through these and they'll make a little bit more sense. But if we talk about the difference between management and delivery, we used to, back in the day, we used decoupled CMSs. Like if you used vignettes or interwoven or documentum or Red Dot or Movable Type. These were systems where the editors worked on one system, they worked in one environment. And then when they published that content, it actually generated an artifact. And an artifact, the difference, content is a conceptual ideal. A content object is a thing that exists in a pure state. An artifact is a thing generated from that content object. When you read a web page, you may look at that and say, well, this is content. It's not, actually, it's an artifact that was made from content. And so what we used to do back in the day, decoupled CMSs, editors would work in the CMS, and then they would publish their content. The CMS would generate a bunch of artifacts and ship it over to some other delivery environment. Honestly, the big, heavy, old guard CMSs of the late 90s were basically massive static site generators. What they would do is they would push all these HTML files somewhere. So this was decoupled, meaning the management and the delivery were not bound together. The only time they were bound together was at the time of publish. So when we say coupled, that's what we mean. The couple is management and delivery, and decoupled means they're kind of separated. So if you want to go to the next slide, what we moved into in the early 2000s, WordPress dates from like 2003, we moved into coupled CMSs. And with coupled CMSs, it's one system. So visitors are consuming content from the other side that the editors are working on. So if a visitor wants to read your content, they go to your website. And if you want to edit your content, you kind of go to /admin or whatever and log in. And this is still today, I would maintain clearly, the predominant form of content management. I mean, WordPress uses this, and WordPress powers something like 40% of the web. Now, the benefit of this is since we maintain an active relationship with our content, we can do more interesting things with it. When we were just pushing data artifacts over the wall, like they were disconnected and like we couldn't really do anything with them. But this has given us the opportunity to keep our fingers in our content while it's being consumed and maybe change it and personalize it, secure it, things like that. Additionally, we don't have to have two different environments, which is very helpful. Now, where we're going, where I think the industry is going, and not necessarily where it should go, but where it is going is Headless CMS. And in Headless CMS, we're decoupling again. But essentially, instead of the CMS pushing artifacts into channels, into delivery channels are doing all the work, and they're just using the CMS as a database. Really, they're just pulling data from the CMS. The CMS has no idea how its content's being used, and just really the brains of the operation are in the delivery channel. So these are the three major coupling environments. What's weird is decoupled is sort of coming back too. We're seeing decoupled CMSs now with these kind of cobbled together static site generation systems. You've had static site generation for a long time, where I would be working on my local machine and I would run a command line operation and it would generate a website like on my local machine, which I could FTP somewhere. But then someone got the bright idea of, well, let's put a static site generator in the cloud. So they put static site generators on servers that really run on the server side. And now we've come full circle back to decoupled CMS that are generating artifacts and putting them in a delivery environment. So it's bizarre how we go round and round and round. But these are the three major coupling environments, and everything we're doing sort of fits in one of these things. And I like this slide. Here's why I like this slide. Because when you talk about decoupled and headless, we're really talking about decoupling our environments, right? Our management environment from our delivery environment. I maintain the difference between the two is where the brains are. So I found a little brain icon, which I was super happy about. So look on the top there, decoupled, the brains are on the CMS side, right? The CMS is deciding like how I'm going to turn all this content into artifacts, right? The CMS is making the leap from content to artifact, and then it's pushing that over to delivery. The delivery channel is dumb. It doesn't know, the CMS has just said, here's what you get. Now, if we go down to the bottom, it's different. The brains have moved from the CMS to the delivery channel. You have some React app or something that is telling the CMS, this is what I need. The CMS is saying, this is what you get. The delivery environment has the brains, and it's telling the CMS, this is what I need. And it's forming the artifacts in the delivery channel. And this is always why, and this can be a contentious statement, but I get frustrated with headless vendors and Jamstack vendors that claim that it's less development, because I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that headless CMS resolves any complexity. It just moves it around. It just moves it from the management layer to the delivery layer. I absolutely believe that. If you look at some of the delivery frameworks we're using now on the web, like the React and all these different things that we're doing, they are, this is again where I feel old saying this, but they are far more complex than server-side CMSs. And So if someone is thinking, well, we're going to go headless and we're going to do all this stuff in the delivery channel, so we'll have less development. I don't believe that's true. I have not seen anything that makes me believe that that's true. It's just as complicated. The complication is just somewhere else.
Dean, you tweeted very recently, I think it was almost a month ago today, that there's a blurry line between Composable and Frankenstein. We've used the word internally here. I think our friend Dennis, who is on here from Barbados, he's used Frankenduck. Could you talk a little bit about this? It's going to lead us into our future state stuff too, but I really thought this one stuck out. We had it going a lot in our Slack internally when it came out.
Composable. It's a new name for an old concept. We used to call it best of breed in the 90s, right? Best of breed was that you didn't buy from one vendor. You picked and chose solutions from all sorts of different vendors. Well, the problem is back then, none of them worked together, right? Every vendor had their own kind of secret garden. Now, today, there's more interoperability and there's web services. You get things working a little bit better together, but there are still huge interoperability problems. And so composable it's a fun word, right? It's a fun word to say. I think people say it because it's kind of a fun word to say, composable. It makes you sound smart. It's like digital transformation, a phrase that meant absolutely nothing, but people just love to say it because it was very trendy and it made it feel very smart to talk about it. And I think the same thing is true of composable. We've been composing digital experience solutions for years and years and years. So there's nothing new here. I just think composable is a marketing term stood up by some vendors and some vendor groups that would like to promote and glamorize their particular way of doing things. And in saying that, I'm not indicting them. I mean, their way of doing things may be perfectly valid, but I just think it's a mistake for us to think that composable is new or interesting. I don't want to say interesting. That sounds pejorative, but new or particularly innovative. It's
Reach.
Yeah, it's a name for something we've been doing for years.
Yep. I just want to agree.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to jump in because
No, this is perfect.
it's
Yeah.
it's a big belief of mine. I'm writing an article that, for all I know, Dean will bash me for it, but I'll make sure he gets it. But I'm just writing an article about these things, and everything from, well, I'm not going to throw stones. It's just the marketing concepts create is just a recreation. And you're saying exactly what I was thinking. I worked for a company called Yantra in 2020, and it was a suite of applications that we like to say was tightly integrated, loosely coupled. Ultimately, it was built on APIs, which meant you could use it or not use it. You could still bring in your best piece. If you didn't want to use the warehouse piece of our, let's call it, composable suite of applications back in 2020, then you plugged in a different one, right? It's the same thing as we were doing 20 years ago. So that tells you how old I am, Dean. You're in good company.
I maintain that, okay, I'm going to get into a little psychology here. Oh, I'm going to philosophize. You said I was a philosopher. So I maintain that everybody wants to invent something. If you work in IT long enough, everybody wants to invent something. They all want to innovate something. And for some reason, we have glamorized the idea of inventing new paradigms. And I think that some people think it is a surrender or a capitulation to simply use an existing solution. Now, I'm going to say that there's a certain type of people that constantly have to innovate. And Scott Hanselman has done a great talk on this. Another link I'll put in Twitter, called the 1% developers. If you work in professional web development, you are very likely looking at a skewed version of your industry. You're looking at people that do web development for a living and are really on top of all like the latest technologies and are desperately trying something new. And the people that you're hearing from, this is a form of survivor bias. The people you're hearing from are the people who are doing new things. If somebody's using existing, if somebody's using server-side rendering to generate their website from their CMS, you don't read case studies about that, right? You only read case studies about things that are interesting and new. No one writes a case study about something people have been doing for 20 years. And so we have the skewed version of our industry that like everybody is doing these innovative, amazing things. No, the innovative, amazing things are sometimes the only things you hear about. And so we have glamorized this idea that we have to reinvent every paradigm, and we don't. And I think everybody wants to innovate something and claim ownership of something. And we see it as a failure if we just use the technologies that other people have written and that we've been using for years. And so I think there's a psychological basis for us constantly having to reinvent things that don't need to be reinvented. And now I just feel like 1 billion years old. So.
Oh, thank you for I like Matt coming in from the top rope with some good info.
Now this slide, I see that the background are tomatoes, and I feel like you're trying to remind me of something.
That's right. So I really still think, much to what you're talking about here, explaining these the terminology and the words in as simplified a way as you can so that we can all understand it, right? That's one of the great things we can do. And so there's two here that I would like to talk through. One is, there's a reason I put the tomatoes behind there, as you said. And then it's also going to lead us into what I really like with the management and delivery piece with a restaurant versus the delivery. So maybe we start with the tomatoes.
Yeah, another link I'll put in Twitter, but I wrote a blog post about tomatoes. And I don't know why this analogy had to me. This is like my life is one big metaphor, which what's funny about that is that in and of itself is a metaphor. So my life being one big metaphor, if you go to a restaurant, you don't order a tomato. Like if you go to a restaurant, you just look up at the waiter and say, hey, I'll have a tomato. He would be like, what? It's just a tomato? And he'd be like, do you mean the marinara sauce? Do you mean the caprese salad? You'd be like, no, I'll just have a tomato. Nobody does that, right? You don't order a tomato. You don't eat a tomato. You eat things that are made with tomatoes, right? You eat stuff that a tomato was part of the agreement, and then it was prepared by somebody. And so when we look at Headless CMS, what I struggle with this is that Headless CMS is like a place where you can put all your tomatoes. You still have to get them out. Once if you make an API call to a Headless CMS, all you get back is raw content. You just get raw tomatoes. Who turns those tomatoes into a dish? Who turns those tomatoes into like something that somebody can consume? I maintain when somebody goes to a website and they go to a URL like /products, that is a statement of intention. They're not saying, I want content object 6551. They're saying, I want to know about your products. What is the logical process that turns /products into an experience? In like, what organizes that? And some system has to do that. Now, some systems, my system in particular, Optimize the Content Cloud, this is what I call response logic. I came up with that term a few years ago. Response logic is when you take in a request and you perform some logic to decide how you're going to respond to that request. Like when someone asks for /products, there needs to be some decision process, some logical rules and processing to figure out how we're going to respond to that. Where is that response logic? Well, a Headless CMS very specifically does not do that. A Headless CMS will give you back the content you ask for. It won't interpret intention. So if you're using a Headless CMS for a website, your response logic is where? It's in your site builder, or it's in your React components, or it's somewhere where you're turning content into experience. And that's just it. When you go to a restaurant, you don't eat a tomato, you eat like marinara sauce, like somebody composes it. Somebody takes that tomato and does something with it and turns it into an experience. And I think that's where we're losing this. And this goes back to my point that headless vendors who say that they require less development, I'm going to say are being a little disingenuous, because they are cutting out massive parts of the process to move people from content to experience. I maintain that for a headless vendor to say, well, our systems are so much simpler. Well, okay, that's true, but they're simple because you just threw a bunch of stuff overboard. That's like a car manufacturer saying, our cars are much more reliable, and they're more reliable because we threw out all the engines. Well, sure, a car without an engine has less things that are going to break, but it also is useless. Like you have to put an engine back into it. So I just maintain that Headless CMS has moved us to a very content-centric look. We're talking about content objects. Well, that matters to us. That doesn't matter to our visitors. They want to know about our products. They want an experience. They want us to communicate some idea. They don't want a tomato. They want marinara sauce. And like, where does that get done? So anyway, that's the tomatoes. I'll put that link in Twitter as well, but I wrote a blog post about tomatoes. So it was kind of weird.
So tomatoes would go into this mix.
This is another
Right?
metaphor.
Potentially.
God,
I like this one a lot.
I need to spend my life just thinking of metaphors. And what's funny is that I kind of do, like my biggest job is thinking of ways to explain things. But one metaphor I explain is this is coupled CMS is like integrated delivery. Whereas headless CMS, oh, that's on the next slide. We'll get there, is like takeout, right? Okay, so go back to coupled CMS. So when you go for the coupled CMS and you order content, like you would order food in a restaurant, the food is prepared, like the management part is done. And then there's an integrated dining experience, which means the restaurant keeps track of you while you eat it. You're sitting in the restaurant and they have a server that comes to check on you and they can bring you a dessert menu. And if you have a problem with your food, you can take it back. I mean, it's an integrated delivery. The whole thing is kind of put together. This is a coupled CMS, that integrated delivery model. And then the next one is headless CMS, is basically takeout, right? The management side is the same, right? The food is prepared, but you have to manage the consumption of that, meaning you have to provide the silverware and the table and all these other things to consume that. And maybe that's what you want. Maybe you want to eat your food sitting in front of Netflix or whatever, and that's great. But once you've done that, you no longer have a relationship with the kitchen. So if you want to send food back, it's complicated. Like nobody's going to bring you like a dessert menu. Nobody's going to come out and check on you. It's different. And so I always maintain that takeout food at restaurants should be cheaper, and it should be cheaper because a whole lot of things the restaurant doesn't have to do anymore. I don't know if it really is or not, but if you eat in a restaurant as opposed to getting takeout, you are consuming a whole bunch more of that restaurant's resources than someone who just gets takeout. Because when someone just gets takeout, all that stuff is their problem. And so, again, I feel like headless CMS, we haven't resolved complexity. We've just kind of moved it around. I don't know.
So Deane, I think we're going to end up having a really spirited discussion when we come to the close, but there's 3 elements here that I'd love to tie together. You've spoken a lot to what my next slides are, but I'm going to try to put them out there, and then if you can be the API that ties them together,
well,
that'd be great.
all this food metaphors made me hungry is the problem.
I know it's going to be lunchtime soon, right? So we have I've liked this term I've heard from you. 1, we have the race to the middle.
Okay.
2, we have what we're seeing over the next 5 years. It's crazy that that's going to be 2027. I'm shocked. And then I kind of had this question of what in your mind is the perfect platform, the Shangri-La, if you will. So race to the middle, what you're seeing the next couple of years, and if you have that, that holy grail of the perfect platform.
The race to the middle. If you look at coupled, decoupled, headless as kind of a spectrum. So you have the traditional coupled CMS on one side of the spectrum, and then you have pure headless CMSs on the other side of the spectrum. We are currently in a race to the middle. Both sides are heading towards the middle. And I'll give you some points of proof for that. Well, in 2015, we built a headless API for Optimize the Content Clouds. We are a coupled CMS with a headless API. Last year, we released a content management API. We released a content definitions API. In 2019, we released a React Foundation sample side. So we are releasing a lot of tools that make us look like a headless CMS. I maintain, and this is a strong statement, but I maintain that inside Optimize the Content Cloud is the world's greatest headless CMS. I mean, the management tools that we have are absolutely first rate, and we have enough headless tools that it's really a fantastic CMS. It just happens to be wrapped in a web content management system. Now let's go on the other side of the pure headless vendors. So they have always sort of crept into delivery. We started seeing this a few years ago. Some headless vendors started offering client-side JavaScript libraries to enable click to edit. So you could go to your website and you could like click and be taken over to the headless UI to edit something. So that was them kind of like waltzing into the delivery channel. And then I remember a headless vendor created a landing page building system where you could have a canvas and you could move things kind of up or down. And it really was just a very low fidelity page builder. It was really funny because it was very low fidelity. Like you were just dealing with things like in a form, but you were moving them around. And I remember thinking, well, you should make this higher fidelity. And then I got to thinking, well, that's just a web content management system if they made this higher fidelity. Contentful, I believe, just released or maybe released last year, Contentful Compose, which is like a page builder. Kentico had their DXP system. And then they released a pure headless CMS. They called Kentico Cloud, and then they renamed it Kentico Content. Well, now they've released Kentico Web Spotlight, which is a website building system that sits on top of their headless CMS. I mean, so there's just this rate, we keep running and getting closer and closer to the middle, to the point where the line is so blurry. And so when we look 5 years from now, what I think is going to happen in terms of web content management delivery is that headless is just going to be a templating choice. And that's what we've tried to impress upon people when we talk to customers and prospects that want to do like React-based templating. They're like, well, I'm doing React. Oh, wrote a web page on this, I wrote a web post on this too, but it was a very angry web page or blog post. So we didn't publicize this, but I'll put the link in Twitter. If you want to build a website with React, you need a web content management system. You're literally just templating it differently, like the last inch of delivery. I mean, in our system, literally the last line of addressable code is where you did the templating. You're just doing it a different way. You still have menus and you still have URLs and you still have the concept of a page. You're just templating it differently. And so what I think is going to happen is that you're going to see a bunch of traditional coupled web content management systems that are just going to have comprehensive support for client-side templating. And when this happens, we're going to break this notion that client-side templating, JavaScript, DOM-based templating like React or whatever, you have to have a dedicated headless CMS for, because I don't think you do, and I think it's counterproductive. There are a lot of web paradigms that really have very little to do with the actual templating and presentation of content that a web content management has solved. I once got to see the content. I'm not picking on Contentful because I know a lot of people there and it's a wonderful CMS, but I got to see a very large website that ran on Contentful once. And I got to see the back end of it. The web developer let me in and he showed me the whole back end of their website. And he was incredibly proud of all of the things that they had done to enable web functionality. Like they said, this is how we're translating URLs to content. And this is how we're doing our navigation and our menus. And this is how we're like doing content areas on the homepage. And they were very proud of this, but all I could think about was every web content management system in the world already does that. You just rebuilt a bunch of functionality that already existed. I didn't tell them this, but that's kind of what I felt like. And so I think I have built websites on headless CMSs and you end up rebuilding a lot of kind of web specific functionality. So I'll go back to my point. I think the system, are we on the next slide? The perfect system. Here's the perfect platform. The perfect platform is something that very much separates management and delivery and lets you swap out your templating layer very, very easily. That supports server-side templating. It supports Blazor and React and Svelte and static site generation and progressive web apps and dedicated mobile and all of these different delivery paradigms that we're supporting right now. The problem as a vendor that we struggle with, I am on the product team at Optimizely, and here's what you struggle with the vendor is that delivery frameworks have fractured so much. It used to be that server-side HTML, that's what everybody did, and it worked great. Now there's 8 billion different frameworks to render things in the browser. Additionally, each one of those frameworks has this huge idiosyncratic stack of supporting technologies. For instance, if you are using React, are you using Redux? Are you using Helmet? Are you using all these different React tools? The number of combinations of delivery side technologies is shocking. So what I think you're going to see is the perfect one is going to be this separates management and delivery and provides a default delivery implementation that you can use out of the box, but you can also provide your own. And at the risk of sounding very salesy, I believe Optimizely Content Cloud is that type of system. It is a system that carefully separates management from delivery, absolutely separates content from presentation. You can use it as a pure headless CMS if you want. You can use our delivery tools as you want. I think that's where the industry's going.
That's great. And Deane, I think we have a handful of folks ready to raise their hands and speak. So
this is the part where I get in trouble, right?
No trouble. I had some teaching slides, but I think you've proved here why you would be such a good teacher to college kids about this subject. Maybe some thumbs up from the folks. So I just we'll go to the part, everyone get your questions ready. I do just want to show a little bit of a community bulletin board before we go there. This has just been a great conversation. tomorrow we will have our inaugural DX Cafe Toastmasters Club meeting, and maybe we should say that Deane is a distinguished member of Toastmasters, because you can maybe learn to speak as well as he can speak to subjects, at least in your domain. So that's tomorrow at 1:30. My friend Ken there is going to put the link in the chat, and we have the link out and about as well. The week of 5/22, we're going to have a little bit of a Conobos Takes Toronto. Several of our members will be there, so if there's anybody in the area, or if anybody knows of anyone in the area, we'd love to meet up, and we have some activities planned. And then, of course, the last two things: if you have topics that you'd like to speak with the community, don't be intimidated by today's. I think this is like a graduate level seminar of this stuff. So this is an open conversation. And then if you have any nominations for community spotlights, we're going to be pushing out the stories of members of the community. So we look for nominations there. And then as I said, I'm an espresso guy. Deane said that he's into instant coffee lately to be able to get the single serve. Maybe we should get him into Nespresso. But let's take questions. I know Dennis, you had some questions that maybe you were going to start off with. Is that okay?
Absolutely. So I was collecting some questions. Ken had asked a couple. Do you see any different use cases where content is delivered from the CMS to the email channel? Or what is the percentage of companies that are doing this? I think that kind of, you spoke to that a little bit.
Well,
actually maybe I'll just...
Let me just speak to that for a second, because I just had an interesting conversation about this with a prospect. Is they want a system to manage their email templates. And when you talk about HTML email, I mean, that's really just another channel for HTML. And so what we had proposed to them, which I still think is a great use case, is just using a web content management system, obviously ours, to build an email like a web page, drag elements, drag blocks around on the page, and form it like a web page, and then just make that available to your email system. Your ability to do that depends on what system you're using for email delivery, but many systems have the ability to pull the HTML for an HTML email from some URL. And I think there's a great use case there. I haven't seen anybody do it yet, but I hope this customer takes the plunge, because I think it's a fantastic use case. I mean, this is an overgeneralization, but what is an HTML except a little web page that gets delivered to you?
It's exactly that. Raheel had an question. That's R-A-H-E-L. I probably butchered the name, but
Rahel Bailey, one of my dearest friends.
I would love them to ask the question themselves.
It's a she.
Rahel, she. Are you there?
Darling, where are you?
Would you like to, yeah.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here. Just fumbling for the buttons. Hold on. There we go. No, there we go. So I had actually made one comment and then one question. So first of all, Deane, thank you.
Hi, sweetheart. It's good to see you.
That distinction. Hi. For making that distinction between management and delivery. So I kind of go like, you need a working environment, an authoring environment, you need a processing environment, you need a delivery environment. And you and I are going to have a metaphor slam one day, because I'm the queen of metaphors. I tell my students this all the time. I use the bakery. It's like, you're building a bakery, and the content people are making the donuts. So in the back, they're not making the chocolate donuts over here and the fruit filled over there. There's like a huge extruder, and it's just like pumping out those donuts and putting it on the
What's with the food metaphors? Like,
because it works.
It's
so
about
well.
noon over here.
It's a cafe. It's a cafe, isn't it?
Starving
now. I know.
But so that was kind of my comment. And I said that I could talk about that for ages, but you do it so well. But the one thing that frustrates me about CMSs, especially now that we're getting into headless CMSs, is that if you look at the way content people work, and so I'm going to make this delineation that there's marketing and content marketing, and there's that kind of like persuasive content, and that works one way. But then there's all this like product content, technical content, in-app content and whatever, and that works a very different way. So we're really good at supporting the marketing folks and the persuasive end, but we're not on the informational side. And so the headless CMS to me is like work environment light, right? There's like some things that it just doesn't do, and I don't know why. And because that's where my technical knowledge stops. Is like, so that you have the XML systems like the CCMSs that do all this stuff, and you can get incredibly sophisticated with it. And nobody wants to use that because XML isn't cool anymore. So they want to do it like right in the headless CMS, but the headless CMSs don't do it. And it's like, does no one sit down with these people and say like, what do you need to really do this work? Exponentially increase your velocity of production, or like why? And are we ever going to get it, or do we have to just kind of?
Okay, so this is great. I very much want to talk to this. For just so everyone knows, Rahel and I are dear friends, and we go back decades. I don't know, forever.
We went from I get to buy Rahel a coffee, like the famous Rahel a coffee, and now we're going to my famous friend Deane, and I'm a nobody.
I don't know what that says about the industry, but also don't even get me started on XML versus JSON. I'm still salty about that. I'll be salty about that forever. We did not need to reinvent XML. XML was just fine. Thank you very much. JSON is basically XML under another name, but don't get me started. I can go on for like an hour. But here's the point I'm going to make, Rahel. The point I'm going to make here is I gave a talk in Denmark about distributed CMS. I'll put a link to that on Twitter again. I believe that your CMS can and should be an aggregated delivery layer from content from multiple different systems. And what I would talk to you about is, Rahel, you should be using a CCMS. You should be using a technical documentation system, and then that should deliver the rendered artifact into a web CMS for delivery. And I am doing this with an organization now. An organization has optimized the Content Cloud. They are building their documentation in SDL something, anyway, some very significant technical writing system. And what it does is when they have a topic, and when they like click publish, it turns that into a zip file, ships it up to optimize the Content Cloud, and we in real time extract it from that zip file and deliver it. And so by doing that, they get all of the benefits, all of the umbrella benefits the CMS provides. We have security, we have templating, we have all of that stuff, but their editors can still work in their own system. So I think that if you look at it like a pyramid, at the top is the actual delivery point, like the actual things taking the inbound request from the visitor. But there could be a multitude of things supporting that. And this is this idea of distributed content delivery, which I absolutely love and adore. And I gave a great talk on this in Denmark. I'll put a link in Twitter. Hopefully you will find that interesting.
I think I would, and I would love to do something jointly with you to explain it, because I don't use the words that you use, and they're unfamiliar to me, but I know the terms that kind of my audience uses, and I would love to kind of join them up.
Well, I will be in London at the end of May, so we will exercise some of our food metaphors and talk about this.
You bet. We'll go to a food place to exercise them too.
Absolutely.
And the other, just one other little thing is, I've been getting into kind of conversation design to understand it because of some reasons that I won't bore you with, but I discovered, I spoke to like a lot of the really well-known conversation designers, and like, what are you using? And they go, Google Sheets. And they're mapping it with like the Visio online version of Visio, and they go, oh, what's terrible is when you realize you've forgotten something right up the top, and then you have to hand renumber all the Visio. And I'm thinking, like, haven't we not moved ahead as a profession? So I'll leave you with that.
Thank you, Rahel. It was good to see you again.
That's great.
That was awesome.
Amazing. Yeah, for sure. I mean, we have enough time, Matt, for one more.
Hey, if we could go till the top of the hour, I'm here.
Lovely,
if
lovely,
others
lovely.
are. This is great. I just want to thank Deane for helping create this just great environment and bringing some great guests.
Absolutely. I have one challenge and for Deane's comment on composability. So 2019, Gartner starts talking about composable business. And I think people have misunderstood what composability was all about. So is composable DXP hype? Is composable business hype? Do you see kind of value in the concept of composability in terms of the business side of things? And does that imply anything for the way that the systems and solutions should be designed on the other side? If that makes sense. And by the way, Deane, I'm just in your amen corner. I heard Matt interject with his amen. I just really love that you're preaching on this topic. Appreciate that very much. So yeah, composability, and what's your take on it from a business composability and agility perspective?
I will also in Twitter, I will put a link to a search for the word microservices on Hacker News. If you go out to Hacker News, which is a very well-known destination for programmers and developers, and you search for microservices, you will see a stunning, overwhelming number of posts of people who saying that they're in microservice hell, that they really loved it when they had what they call a beautiful monolith or a magnificent monolith. The problem with microservice and composability is now you have multiple different vendors to juggle, and you have multiple different services that you have to have interact with each other, which can be very, very problematic. And so people think it makes you more agile. Well, not really, because what you have is you have people introducing features that depend on 7 different services to work. And so any change to a feature, you're going to have to coordinate across multiple different services. Additionally, there should be nothing composable that is mission critical. Now, that's an overstatement. What I see people doing is using composability, thinking it makes them more agile, but using it for something that is utterly mission critical and their digital experience doesn't work without it. If you have done that, then I would maintain it's not a microservice. You just split out some mission critical functionality that you have to desperately hope stays up. I'll give you an example of very appropriate use of composability. We have a product, our content recommendations product. So what it does is it tracks the content that you consume on a website, and it does some natural language processing on that, gets it into a topic, analyzes the rest of your content, and it provides, like at the end of a blog post, you can see recommendations for like the next step in your journey. That to me, great opportunity for composability in microservices. And why is that? Because your website doesn't break without it. Obviously, the experience will be a little bit less. They won't get recommendations, but your website does not break without that. And so that is something that could very, very easily be composable. Headless CMS theoretically could be composable as well, as long as you're like interstitially caching it, if you're using it like statically generate a site or something. But I don't believe in anything totally composable for something that absolutely has to be running or you're out of business. From a business standpoint, I'm just not in love with that idea. But again, I might just be old.
Both of us.
One of our, oh, sorry, guys. Deane, one of our great workers is our young man here, Morgan, and he tries to put together simplifying things like what is an API, what is a DAM, what is all this. So Morgan, I'd love if you'd speak your question. We'll hear your voice.
Hey Deane, great session. My question was, what do you think about the interchangeable use of composable DXP and headless CMS?
I think it's wrong. It's a false equivalence. A headless CMS is something that just manages content. And when people say headless, they mean one of 2 different things. They either mean they want a headless CMS or they want to do like client-side React templating. So when people say headless, they kind of jump across the management delivery line all the time. A composable DXP is a system that provides both management and delivery functionality, and you can pick and choose what you want. So like Contentful, again, I don't mean to pick on Contentful. Great system, nice people, love them. But they don't really provide any delivery functionality. They're not a composable DXP. They've never claimed to be one. They would never be one. So if somebody wants to say that a headless CMS like Contentful and a composable DXP are equivalent and interchangeable terms, I would dispute that completely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just looking through now that I stopped sharing, I'm just looking through our questions here. Yeah, no, this was absolutely great. I mean, did anybody else have another question that they wanted to put out there? Because I would leave on the one point that I didn't get to speak to, which I think would be very interesting to everybody here. How do you teach a college class about this subject? How do you put together the rubric? How do you decide intro, advanced, right?
you know how you teach a college class on this? You get a phone call from your dear friend Rahel Bailey, and she says, hey, would you please teach a college class on this? That's what happened. I have always wanted to teach content management at the university level. It's always a dream of mine to do that. And Rahel is involved. She is one of the kind of founding advisors for a master's in content strategy course at a university in Graz, Austria. Graz is the second largest city in Austria. And they are, to our knowledge, certainly at the time, and they might still be the only university that offers a master's degree in content strategy. And as part of this master's degree, they wanted to have a course on content management. And Rahel said, I know just the guy. He's a narcissist. He loves the sound of his own voice. He'd be a great college instructor. So Rahel called me up, and I put together curriculum. My syllabuses are Creative Commons licensed. I will put them out on Twitter as well if you want to see the syllabus. I teach 2 courses on it. The Introduction to Content Management course is 8 lectures, 2 books, and 2 assignments. And the Advanced Content Management course is 10 lectures, 2 books, and I think 7 assignments. And I'll put it out there. You can see the entire curriculum and how I kind of break it down. But what's important to understand about teaching a college course, especially about something that's so fast moving as this industry, is that you have to keep changing it. Every time they say, okay, we need you to teach this in the fall, I have to sit down and figure out, okay, what's changed. One of the biggest thing that changed is, pricing CMS. We moved from like a pay a big chunk of money and fractional subscription to like annual subscription. I had to completely redo the acquiring a CMS course like a year ago. So you always have to change it over time. So the idea that you're going to teach this once and never change it is a pipe dream. I constantly have to revisit this course over and over again. But I adore teaching this course. I love to teach, but I hate evaluating. So I love teaching the students. I don't want to say kids because a lot of them are in their 30s and 40s. But I hate evaluating them. It stresses me out to no end. I've never had to fail somebody, and I'm fingers crossed I never will have to.
Well, that's absolutely great. And you still have the time to, I don't know if we said it while everyone was on, you read 8 to 12 books a month on top of it, right? So
I do. I'm just putting my Twitter handle in and to chat. And again, when I'm putting this in here, I'm not begging for Twitter followers, but there's like a billion different links I want to send you folks.
I don't think you have to beg.
And for me to send you these links, Twitter is the most efficient way. So
no, that's great. I have trouble reading to the end of an email, so I can't imagine reading 8 books.
Fair.
Thank you for this, Composable. This has been really great. Deane, I'm sorry I'm jumping in here, but I'm sorry I haven't met you like 3 years ago, because I really enjoyed
the 20 years ago.
There's always time.
20 years ago, right, when I was at Yantra. Anyway, I really enjoyed the content, and thank you, Composable. This was really great. Great session today. Thank you.
I'll just want to jump in and I'll thank Matt and Deane and Matt Boland as well. I mean, this is what the DX Café is supposed to be about, is to connect all of us digital professionals so that we can learn from each other. And so thanks again, Matt and Deane, everybody in attendance for that. Thanks for showing up for each other today.
Yeah, look forward to seeing everybody again for sure.
Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Deane.
I enjoyed it.